Hello, I'm Sam Gerrans. Today is Tuesday, 18th of June, and today we're going to be looking at why no one can challenge the Islamic scholars. All right, now in this video, what I want to do is discuss why it's actually impossible. I don't mean difficult, I mean actually impossible a priori to challenge the Islamic, I mean here mainly the sort of Sunni orthodoxy. And the reason is what they have is a kind of series of basically put downs. Now, I'm not arguing here necessarily for my own process or my own conclusions. What I've been doing here is, as I explained ad nauseum, is doing my own process of due diligence on the Quran. I mean, the Quran does tell you to reason. It says it's from God. It says God will preserve it. It says that it's complete. It says it is susceptible to reason. All of these things, but the religion itself actually excludes those things. And I'm not alone. I'm not the first person to spot these things. There have been people who have taken a Quran alone position right the way through the history since the revelation. There are analogous peoples within, say, for example, the Jewish traditions. The Karaites are a so-called sect within Judaism, and they don't necessarily hold to all of the other stuff. So it's not an original thought or anything like that. But what you find is they're a bit like, well, how do you pray? Which assumes the conclusions that it is prayer and your job is to go, salat we're talking about here, and your job is there to go off and find this prayer. This is an assumed conclusion. And there are other sort of put downs, or another one would be, whatever the prophet, whatever the messenger gives you, accept. And this is supposed to be a justification for the hadith. Obviously, they haven't read the entire verse or even any of the verses around it, but that's not what I want to look at today. I had a couple of comments now on my YouTube. I don't answer comments on YouTube really, but I do scan through them. And there were a couple of comments that just struck me. One was where I'm talking really about explaining that the Quran has a straight path within it, and just pointing out that mathematically, if every believing Muslim, if every ostensible Muslim is praying all of what they claim to be the five canonical prayers, then 11 trillion times a year Muslims are asking God to show them the straight path. But you actually find the straight path because the Quran tells you what it is. And anyway, a comment here says, Sam, you're lucky. Many of us have these types of people in your comment as family members, aunties, uncles and cousins, where we have to dine or be around such ignorance. And I laughed because I know exactly what it's like, because I come from actually what I consider to be an analogous background, which is basically progressive, what I call progressive libtardism. And it has exactly the same mechanisms. Obviously, the content is different, but it's all about assumed conclusions. It's a bit like the question, well, how many times a week do you beat your wife, or something like this? Excuse me, this is how it works. And I had an analogous or a related comment on a different video, Salat or Islamic prayer does not fit with the Quran. And somebody wrote, I communicated to friends and family about the 1187 passage not making sense the way Sunnis claim, and their exact response was that you, i.e. me, are not a scholar. So in effect they're saying they take their scholars as lords because they couldn't actually respond to me with logic. They just took their usual default response that to you that you're not a scholar. And just to relate this to my own experience, I mean, they're right. I'm not as a Sunni Islamic scholar. That's correct. I mean, but that therefore means that you're wrong. They're not actually looking at your argument. And I grew up with something very close to this in what I, sort of progressive, what I call libtardism, where again they assume all of their conclusions and define the question for you, and then proceed to attack you on the basis of their own assumptions. So I've seen all this before. There is very little new under the sun. But what I wanted to do was get into this question itself. Obviously, I'm talking from my own, sort of personal position, but that isn't what I'm defending or really primarily interested in. The Quran itself claims, as I say, to be susceptible to reason, and it challenges the reader to think and to reflect upon it and so on. And so, of course, I've done my own due diligence, but this as the reasoning. Well, you're not a scholar, okay, that's true, as I say, but I want to sort of disattach this from me personally and just talk you through the process of how it works. So, firstly, let's take a reasoned Quran alone position, or anything which does not presuppose the orthodoxy, and it's very similar in my own background, as I say, sort of progressive libtardism. Firstly, you're not an expert, or you're not a scientist, or you're not a whatever it is, or you don't have this, that, or the other identity. Therefore, your position is a priori invalid. They both do exactly the same things. So the argument is, whether it's to me or to somebody else, you're not a scholar, therefore your opinion is invalid. The next one that is used is that you're not an Arab. Okay, well, let's say you are an Arab, okay, but then if you're an Arab, you're not the right kind of Arab. So let's say you're an Arab from the Maghrib, your Arabic is deficient, or it's not close enough to the pristine Arabic of the Quran. But let's say that you come from somewhere where the language is a little closer to that. Well, then you don't have the right education. Let's say you do have the right education, but you're not a scholar. And then you say, okay, well, let's say you check all those boxes. You are an Arab from the right kind of Arab background, and you are a scholar. You studied in Egypt, and you became a qualified X, Y, or Z. Then, let's say, you really start to read the Quran for yourself and come to let's say some of the conclusions that I and many other people have come to. Well, then you're a deviationist. You're an innovator. And you're spreading fitna. You see how it works? It's a closed cycle. There's no way out of it. It doesn't matter what you do. And the reason why I'm saying this, it's very similar. In fact, it's actually completely analogous to progressive libtardism. It doesn't matter what shape you bend yourself into. They're never satisfied, and they will never accept argument, because it's not about argument. It's about, I suppose, essentially it's about orthodoxy and just about belonging, and because mainly people are weak-minded followers. It's just the truth. It's not an insult. It's just an observation from life. So all that to say, and I want to keep this pretty short, is that what would work better is if they just acknowledged that they're not amenable to reason. I mean, I'll just give you another, just going back to progressive libtards. For years, okay, I've been trying to explain, let's say, to my family or people I care about, pointing out things about, let's just say, take one obvious example, 9/11, 2 planes, 3 buildings. There's a great line in a film, American Beauty, and it's this: never underestimate the power of denial. It doesn't matter what you say. They've got a name to call you. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're an ist, an ite, or an obe. And we have to add not a scholar to this. It's not about reason. And the sooner that you, I, everybody else just understands that, the easier it's going to be. I'm personally not here trying to convince the adherents of what I call brand Islam of anything. It's not my job. But by the same token, I'm also not going to allow them to dictate my faith, because theirs is not based in reason, and I am doing what I call my own due diligence. But this is absolutely analogous to why I would not allow myself to be sort of kettled intellectually into a worldview by sort of progressive libtard worldview, which assumes, again, its conclusions and attacks you not on the basis of facts, not on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of anything other than their pre-existing rejection of your right or to think for yourself. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. They tell you to think for yourself, but they just don't like it when you do. And that's been my experience, but who cares about any of that? So again, just to wrap this up, I'm sure a lot of people have come across a lot of these things, but part of what I'm interested in and what I've seen is the correlation between what I call progressive libtardism and brand Islam. It's not immediately apparent, but they use a lot of the same underlying technology, as it were, of lies, name-calling, shaming language. It doesn't matter if you're, for example, what they do against men now in the West, identity politics, all of this thing. And that's why I've argued that really the reason why the ruling elite are bringing brand Islam and into the West and promoting it is because they know that they can use the unthinking foot soldiers to promote this thing, but they don't realize what they're doing. It's a way of degrading and actually compounding the delusion which is in the West as it collapses, which it quite clearly is. So it's all to do with a view that's predicated on its assumptions and then attacks anybody who has any questions. And so brand Islam is not unique. It doesn't have a monopoly on this, but it's definitely a major shareholder in the franchise. Anyway, that's it. Those are my thoughts on that. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.